I'd like to take a minute to welcome everyone to our inaugural ZEDEDA Transform Conference. Thank you all for joining us today. This session is matchmaking in the ecosystem. If you're in the right session, great, welcome. If you want to go to another one, you can. We have a chat session going on the right-hand side there. Please put your questions there. My role here is chaperone. My name's Lisa. I will be going away, but I'll still be around. If you need me for anything, feel free to chat. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Stacey Higginbotham, and I'll let you take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. And welcome, everybody, to the matchmaking panel. I will not sing any songs from Fiddler on the Roof as much as I want to. Instead, I'm going to tell y'all a little bit about what we're going to talk about and why we care so much about ecosystems. And the big picture is ecosystems are essential for IoT because IoT is not just one technology. It is a mix of a bunch of different technologies, all the way from the actual boards and connectivity to the business processes that you've got to actually enact. And that's a lot to cover, and no one company can deliver everything, and no one person can make this all come together. So I have a very smart panel, but we're just gonna get right into it. So they're gonna introduce themselves as they're answering these questions, so you get a sense of where they're coming from. So let's just kick it off with, man, how do we start creating an ecosystem? And I'm gonna throw this first to Andy Tim. Andy, tell us who you are and how should we think about creating an ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. So my name's Andy Tim. I've been in the IoT space for about a decade, first as a management consultant and then as the CTO of PTC. I am now calling myself a digital orchestrator. And like you said, there's a gap between what businesses understand about emerging technologies, IoT and more broadly, AR and VR and AI, ML, manufacturing techniques, these types of things. System important, as you mentioned, I call them wedges. I think of the Trivial Pursuit analogy that I've been using for a while, where in that analogy, you got to get all the little triangles to win the game. In an IoT solution, you need to think about every job that needs to be done. So in addition to all the hardware and software components, someone needs to install sensors, maybe cameras. There needs to be someone that's training users, someone who needs to support users. And a lot of the, especially in the early days of IoT, companies really just wanted to sell their sensor, their hardware, their platform, their service. And too much of that complexity fell on the end customer who are, just not sophisticated enough yet to figure out where do I get the rest of these pieces. So, figuring out that ecosystem, how does it come together? I think, the business that I'm in is maybe targeted more for mid-market, but a lot of these companies, if you're a startup that has an edge sensor, you've probably gone and found a partner that you have to find a partner. Your edge hardware on its own doesn't do anything. So you're going to start playing that role of matchmaker on your own. So you're not just a single wedge, you might be a couple of wedges. And then you pair up with, an Arrow Electronics that can help you find the rest of the pieces and start to push through scale. And a lot of these companies, like Microsoft, represent many of the wedges. They've got, a great cloud platform. They've got an IoT platform. They've got analytics tools. And, I kind of see Microsoft as a route to market. Maybe most importantly, they've got millions of customers that are struggling with their own digital transformation. So the ecosystem is out there already. It's just trying to find the right ways to put them together to kind of do that mapping exercise between what is the business need or opportunity and what exists in the ecosystem to solve the problem.
And you name checked a couple companies that we've got here. We're going to skip over to Roland at Arrow. You mentioned sophistication, and I want to challenge that a little bit, just because the idea, I don't think people are less sophisticated, but they're just sophisticated in different ways. And I think one of the challenges and reasons we have to build these ecosystems is because you might have divides between the IT people and then the people who are building and deploying the actual sensors and what we call the OT, operational technology. So Roland, I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk about how you kind of build, I don't know if that's an ecosystem or if it's just a divide within the company, but share with us what you know about that.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. Hi, everyone. My name is Roland Ducote. I work at Arrow Electronics, and I spend a lot of time focused in on our alliance partners and building out solutions within our ecosystem and working within the other ecosystems for organizations like Microsoft. So I think I'll try to answer the question in a way that we were talking about during our prep call, which, organizations like Arrow who have been in the channel, and I would say organizations that have participated in a channel, have always engaged in a type of ecosystem. Channels have always been around because there's things like finite resources, technology changes, requires training, Barry, and channels mitigate risk. So the difference between the channel and the ecosystem is I think the ecosystem requires us to think about our channel partners differently and ask questions about the value we bring to our partners, how they actually get that value, and then how they're interacting with our brand. So I think ecosystems are a riff on channels because I think maybe visually, I think channel thinking and programs have a clear hierarchy. So you have like gold, silver, and bronze partners. Visually, ecosystems are different, where they're much more modular and built for what the world we're living in today, where we have resources in some areas but not in others. And so it requires orchestration to bring together that complete solution. How'd I do? Is that helpful?
That was an interesting riff. I'm sitting here thinking about channels as an extension or as a part of the ecosystem. I may disagree with you a little bit, but it's not my place. We're going to call it Jason. That's right, Jason. Look up at us. It's your time to shine. We're having you introduce yourself and then talk about how to create ecosystems. And I don't know if you have thoughts on. We've talked about Andy's wedge theory already, but what do you think about how to build an ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it brief. I want to make sure that there's a good time for everybody. I mean, I talked about this a bit in the keynote panel, but I'll kind of emphasize these days. It used to be, so to some degree, I mean, definitely the channel. I think it does matter. I mean, I think that that's where a confluence of different providers come together, whether it's services or technologies or whatnot. But it used to be that the way you create ecosystems is partner with people and do it after the fact. I believe the way you build ecosystems these days is you architect your offer for an ecosystem, and then you go build partnerships that expand and create a network effect around that offer. And we talked a lot about open versus closed, in the keynote. If you do a closed ecosystem, that's cool, but it costs a lot of money. And you better be ready for it to get everyone to gravitate around your thing. And there's some scalers out there that can certainly do it. But when you go on the other extreme and you build an open ecosystem, you can get a network around that shared technology investment, and then that flywheel effect kicks in. And I think this event, just the fact that so many great people and companies are coming together, around this kind of common cause, why we need some degree of openness. Everybody wants some degree of stickiness, but I think ecosystems is decide where you want to be on the open versus closed spectrum. Architect your solution to build that network effect. Along that, you just be ready to pay for it if it's closed, and then kind of start building the partnerships. But very big difference, between partner after the fact or architect up front. I think you have to architect for ecosystems up front.
Okay. And Jeff, I know that I don't know if you have a thought on building open or closed ecosystems, or if you want me to flip forward to the next question. Do you have a thought, Jeff?
I do, and I think I'll echo what Jason shared is, open ecosystems are key, right? I mean, I think from Microsoft perspective, we look at providing the platform upon which our partner ecosystem can build solutions. And I'm just looking at the notes in the chat window. Cynthia brings up a good point. Ecosystems have to bring simple, scalable solutions, and I think without simple, scalable, and easy to conceive of solutions, right, it's very difficult to get outside of that POC purgatory that we see so frequently in the IoT space. So yeah, absolutely, an open ecosystem is critical to success.
Okay. So we're all pro ecosystem. It might look a little bit different for each of us. We've talked about the reasons to or the ways to architect it and think about it. Let's talk about who needs to be in the room. And Barry, I feel like you're probably a people person. Who needs to be in the room when you're starting this process? And how do you think about people in an ecosystem?
That's a great question. So just by way
first introduce yourself. Oh,
sure,
okay,
sure.
You're doing it.
I'm Barry Kaufman. I'm the VP of Client Development for Cloud for a company called Fastlane. We're a global learning and enablement company. We work with all the major vendors in the AI and IoT space. We have experience in deploying skills programs across ecosystems, bringing in multiple vendors, and really enabling businesses to support their digital transformation objectives with the skills necessary to prove the value of those digitally transforming technologies. When it comes to I'm sorry, Stacy, what was the question again was?
We're like, I forgot. It is who needs to be in the room? Let's talk about people as part of these ecosystems, how to build
and that's a great question. What I've seen in the industry is oftentimes people are just focused on the tech staff that needs to be in the room, particularly when you're looking at digital transformation solutions like IoT. Big miss on that side, and I think the term was POC purgatory is what you end up creating. You get people who are in love with a solution, who to them they see the value, it's clear and present, and they're the biggest voice in the room. If you don't bring leaders and the line workers into the solutioning process, into the co-creation process, then you're really missing out on potentially the long-term value creation that you can participate in. So I believe that a skilling plan should look at all of those players that are going to be consuming or producing that solution, lift all of them up on the same, give them a common language, make sure that it aligns to a business's objectives, and then those people will carry the solution and the value forward.
And Roland, how practical is that? Are you seeing companies do that? Who's doing it how are the successful companies doing it?
Sure. So yes, we do that. I think, to Barry's point, you want to mitigate POC purgatory by having that end in mind. And so let's assume it's tied into business goals and you've got good ROI and financial metrics, et cetera. I think I've heard it a couple times from our partners. It's like, hey, we'll do the first 10 installs ourselves, but then when you scale that out to 100 or 1,000 or more, it gets really complicated really quickly. So like Barry was talking about, you don't want to get stuck in POC purgatory. So having that end in mind and having those installers, a training methodology for them to do that, along with the fact of like when it breaks, and it will, where does the first call go? And these are just practical things that I think are really important to have those decision makers in the room.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about, sorry, Stacey, like the install part, and exactly what Barry is saying, Roland's saying, like, I was just on the phone. So obviously our whole mission at ZEDEDA is like, go help things scale. We see when people get past about 50 deployments, it falls apart. DIY is cool. You mentioned 100, about 50 to 100. And I was literally on the phone a couple of weeks ago with a ISV prospect, partner potential. And they're like, yeah, we just don't have that problem right now. We're doing retail stuff, computer vision. We just don't see that problem. And then literally the next week, they're like calling us, okay, we just got a big deal and we got a problem. How can you help us, get out there and at scale? And so it's just you say POC purgatory, I call it the POC friend zone. You can't get out of the POC friend zone. But either way, yeah, it's getting past that. But, just something that we experienced just recently.
So we focused on the people who are doing installations or the people who are actually using the business process. On the tech team or maybe executive side, Jeff, do you have thoughts about actually I'll say Jeff or Andy, do y'all have thoughts about who needs to be in the room, where the leadership needs to come from here?
I think, Andy, you might have been a little closer to this from a practical term, so maybe I'll let you kick it off and I'll follow on if that works for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can, kind of have an open discussion. There's kind of a newer model that I've been pushing that is hard to scale. I think harder to scale from a big company like Microsoft, but the two pieces play together. When you say who's in the room, I'm suggesting a new role is required, this digital orchestrator, someone who's got 1 foot in the business camp and 1 foot in the technology ecosystem. And, to make sure you're not in pilot purgatory, you're not starting with an exploration of some technology you want to go play with. You're starting with a business problem to solve, or an opportunity, what I'm calling a desired business outcome. And then you're working with your digital orchestrator, which could be, someone in your company, it could be a consultant, it could be a partner that you've been working with, to figure out what technology either exists today that could solve this problem, or if it's something that doesn't exist today, how do I go put the pieces together? So first, which technologies are required? I need an edge hardware, I need a cloud solution, I need an IoT platform, I need an installer, I need a supporter, I need a trainer. And then go figure out how much it's going to cost to bring those people together, and is the ROI higher than the cost? If so, you keep moving, you go find the people who put it together. And once that solution comes out, we should wrap it up and put a bow on it and stick it in all of the channels that have one of their wedges consumed in that solution. So if Azure's in it, we stick it in a Microsoft channel. If it's being trained by Barry's guys, it goes in that channel. If it's got ZEDEDA involved, that's kind of how I see this working. Now how that translates into scale is a little bit harder to solve.
Yeah, Andy, 100% agree, and I like your term of a digital orchestrator. I think I've seen a lot of different titles and creative titles be put on that role, but that's critical at this point, right? We start with a business problem. There's a lot of solutions out there in search of a problem. That doesn't get anybody anywhere, right? So getting the business case and getting that business justification up front and aligned, and then figuring out the right solutions is absolutely the key. And without a person on point to address that and own that, increasingly things tend to go sideways. So completely agree with your assessment.
Yeah, and then the digital orchestrators that I'm kind of getting on the bus, if you will, are typically guys or gals that have been in a C-level role somewhere, that have an ecosystem of C-level buddies that they can call and say, hey, I know your business, I know you have this challenge, I know you have this opportunity, and guess what, I've got a solution for it. So yes, digital transformation is hard. It can be scary. It's an ongoing process, but you don't need to wait 6 months or a year to get some value to come out. You have this problem. I have a solution. Let's go figure out if it makes sense. So you can imagine how, teams of these people like Uber, create an ecosystem of digital orchestrators like Uber drivers that are doing this, and everybody is making money on their wedge, doing the job that they're good at, that they should be doing. Because every company at this point, maybe that's an overstatement, most of the companies are kind of forced to do other jobs that they don't really want to. If you're a startup with the best AI algorithm on the planet, that doesn't do you any good. You got to go find these other partners. So what if there's a way that you just bring your wedge to the table, and there's a way that everybody else gets kind of self-aggregated, and then someone, or a whole bunch of someone's take it to market for you, and you're now selling to people you never met, and all the jobs are solved.
That's where I'm sorry, Stacey. That's where I would add that Cynthia asked the question about how do you decide which of the whatever the running joke is right now of IoT platforms to work with. I mean, it's about finding somebody that's doing something valuable, not reinventing the wheel necessarily. That's part of a bigger thing than themselves. Whether they've got their own ecosystem or they've joined an open thing, either way. The winners are people building necessarily unique hardware and software, offering great services. And Andy, to your point, or all of your points, is that have domain knowledge. Domain knowledge rules. There's so many people out there talking about, I can do predictive maintenance, but the developers that are talking about that have never set foot in a factory floor. So it really is about domain knowledge. Stacey, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh yeah, no. So I was gonna say we've got these wedges that we're assembling here. I think there's 2 points to think about here. One is clarity, right? Like, how do you really define what your wedge is? Because I think that's really important, and there's probably some overlap here. And then also, how do you start marketing that and selling that? Because getting value in an ecosystem is a little bit different. I can't go to one company and do you offer them like a wedge buffet? I'm going to call it a pie buffet now. So a pie buffet, or do you say
that
I can
sounds
give
amazing.
you rhubarb and apple? So let's talk about one, how to clarify your wedge / type of pie, and B, how do you go to market and sell that either on your own or in conjunction with others? And I'm going to throw that open to Roland because he's nodding.
Gosh,
Roland, you did it.
Right. So I think we do a lot of work with the folks over at Intel as well, and that we've been talking about a concept of system of systems for many years. So it's not to say system too many times, but you've got organizations like Arrow that bring together a wide variety of different things, and we work with our partners like Intel, who also have their own ecosystem, and it's the same as Microsoft. And so bringing together each one of those different organizations, whether they be a partner or we're within the same ecosystem, is how you do it. It's certainly not easy, and it takes a decent amount to what Andy would talk about in terms of orchestration, to get alignment within an organization as to what their needs are and legitimately what their skills are and what they are not. I think organizations have gotten a whole lot better at this, and it's generally been through a level of pain and experience that they've maybe failed on a project or realized that there's things that they want to take a hold of. There was a question around 600 different IoT platforms, and I think that was part of it, where years ago each organization wanted to go out and build their own platform, and now that's simply not the case. So tying it back into the system of systems, I think that's a big part of what we think big organizations like Intel and Arrow and Microsoft can bring to the table, is that we've got a lot of those relationships built already.
Okay. And I'll let someone else answer that. But Barry, I do want to ask you, because in a way you're a consumer of the wedges/pie, right? You're trying to build programs around training people in these different areas. So what do you think people can do and big companies can do to offer clarity that you can then turn around and build programs around or help people develop skills around?
I think a lot of the big companies, I would say to Roland, you mentioned Microsoft and you mentioned Intel. They've done some of the right things. I've worked with Intel, for example, and helped build out their IoT sales championship program for their internal 10,000 staff sellers as well as their channel. And what they need to focus, what the intention is there, is to when you're deploying these ecosystem full stack solutions, there are behavior changes that happen on the go-to-market side and on the receiving end. And that behavioral shift is something that isn't being properly valued, I think. I think Intel did a good job of it. I see, Jeff, that folks at Microsoft are investing in this digital transformation in the right ways. But I think that's a key piece, is leveraging skilling programs to address everyone's needs that are touching the solution, the consumers, the developers, the architects, and ensure they speak the same language and are driving towards a new reality, in a sense, a new reality where that value has been realized. And so I think that embedding the right skilling programs and sometimes it's about educating the customer about it beforehand, so they're making the right decisions about the solution, that they're bringing the right people into it. So I look at embedding skills throughout the conversation with the enterprise that's going to be exploring, exploiting, and driving the solution. And I see that coming out of the vendors in some cases, and love to see more of it.
Okay, we're going to come back to that when we talk about preparing your business for like an ecosystem. But let's go back to establishing value in figuring out who sells what and going to the market with an ecosystem. Andy, I'm going to you because you're nodding again. Roland's learned.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to tie together here. If you go back to this idea that each company, each wedge should focus on the thing that they do best or the things that they do best. I think, what Barry's talking about, this upskilling, that there's definitely a lack of focus on the training aspect. How do we cover the user adoption? How do we cover the organizational change that's required when a new technology is put in front of a company? And if that's missed, if the company you want this package solution, let's take all the remote collaboration software that's out there right now. You've got a head-mounted tablet with some software on it. Maybe it's running Teams. You can't just give this to people and hope for the best. So if you think about the components of that solution, there might be a head-mounted tablet, there's some software, there might be some integration needs to happen, then there's training and support. And Microsoft has Teams, one of the best solutions out there for that, but where do we get the rest of that stuff? So I start to think about, how do we make this easy? In my perfect world, you would have this marketplace for IoT solutions that is as simple to acquire technology as it is to download, Flappy Bird on your iPhone, and if there's a fee, it just gets added to your T-Mobile bill, right? And everything else is done for you. And depending on your region, you select which partner you want, or maybe you've already got a partner that does the installation. So I think I kind of forgot the original question, but I think that the point is that a company like Microsoft, who's got millions of customers, there's undoubtedly a huge number of existing solutions in the tech space that those customers could use today. They just don't know that they exist. And if they did know that they exist, there's still a couple of these wedges missing. So if we can figure out how to assess and turn these into solution packages with every job solved for, I think this gets a lot easier.
Andy, this is Jeff. I'll just chime in because I couldn't have asked a more elegant tee up, and also a brutal reminder that I never introduced myself during the course of this conversation. So,
who are you, Jeff? Who are you?
Just a mystery lurker. So apologies, folks. So Jeff Cornwell with Microsoft. I run our IoT category globally for Marketplace. And when we look at how we as a company go to market and how we support an ecosystem, really our commercial marketplace is that vehicle. It's been an investment area for us for quite some time. And as we've gone into calendar year 2020, it has really hit that maturity level where it's what I call creating those right connections. And when I talk about creating connections, it creates connections for customers to find partners, partners to find partners. And an important but often underestimated one is helping our sellers find partners. That's often a big gap, is getting the right solutions in front of our sellers who are talking to our largest enterprise customers, who want to get those solutions in front of those customers to drive value for all the different, I'm trying to think of how to continue the wedge analogy, but we'll just leave it where it is. But again, so from a commercial marketplace standpoint, Andy, to your point, that's exactly what we're looking to drive right now. And as I look at the IoT category, we have hundreds of IoT solutions in a commercial marketplace for Microsoft right now. And your point is well said, right? Our goal is to make it as simple as find, go. And now that's great for individual solutions that are predefined. But in those situations, in the reality of the IoT space, it's very rare to find a single solution that solves everything, to the point that we had at the very beginning of this conversation. And so where Marketplace is playing a really interesting role now is helping partners find other partners to combine solutions to address customer needs. And so one of the ways that it's manifesting itself today is something called, we call an integrated solution, where multiple partners can come together around a package solution that can be listed and promoted in our marketplace and made available to customers. So a lot of great ways to do this, but I think the common goal here is we want to make connections through Marketplace, but ultimately we want to make it easy for our customers and our partners to buy and deploy without much headache or without much strain.
Jason, I was going to make a terrible joke about Tinder for businesses, but I'm going to let you.
Let me go there. I talk all the time. So when we started this at Dell Technologies, I built up the ecosystem there for IoT and Edge. They're continuing to run there. With the team, and I joked in like 2015. I'm like, hey guys, we're gonna go really broad, and then we're gonna go very deep. We're gonna do Tinder, and then we're going to do eHarmony. Because initially, when in 2015, it was just a mess. I mean, it's still a little bit of a mess, but what was happening then was small platforms, that startups that had built up domain knowledge in one area, and they happened to build up technology to get to data, but it was more about the outcome, of course. I know more than you ever want to know about cold chain logistics or monitoring oil wells, whatever. That was where the initial traction was. But then what we've been trying to do in the broader community is, and then of course Microsoft was building up, their offer, and eventually what happens is that those small vertical platforms, to even Cynthia's point, either have to pivot and become really good at one thing, stop reinventing the middle, or become a services partner, or you're going to go away. You have to enable the infrastructure to become more standard, and then you become part of that value around the wheel. So it was. Tinder in 2015, we probably moved to eHarmony around 2017. At ZEDEDA, we're working with a lot of great people, and it's about finding people that are good at what they do, that build something that's a bigger part of something else. And you get the wedges, you get the pieces of pie. I just said I love rhubarb pie, so that just made me really hungry. And then bring those folks that have a go-to dance move together. And then you scale from there, and then I think that's the key part. Longer term, it's not about reinventing the wheel. And so at ZEDEDA, I joke now we're going straight to eHarmony in terms of bringing folks together. We're not in the data path. We just help things scale. We're working really closely with a number of folks. Of course, the folks on the panel. We've been integrating with Azure IoT to help kind of scale things out in the field. Jeff's been a great partner there. It takes a village, as we always keep saying. So. eHarmony.
So, there you go. So I'm going to ask, because most of y'all are at ginormous companies, with the exception of Andy, who's on his own. And Barry, you work with big companies. So a lot of the more innovative solutions are coming from startups. Not all, but there are definitely some really interesting things there. And so how would you tell them to approach, how should they approach the ecosystem? And you can even flip it and say, hey, I, as a giant company, how do I build an ecosystem that allows for innovation to come from startups? Because I think that's also important and relevant. So I'm not going to just go. Someone.
I can go. So Arrow's been doing this for the past 4 years or so, where we had a partnership with Indiegogo, and that was really driving startup organizations to submit. And we have a whole badge program, so you can go to Indiegogo and see what we're doing there. But that's one way that we're supporting organizations, and that's through our traditional components value proposition. So even though we're a distributor, we do a lot more than that. So you can't really find a distribution analogy in another type of industry where we actually have design experts that can help you lay out your products. So that's on the one side. We also work with a lot of smaller companies who what we call are independent software vendors. So they develop very specific intellectual property for a specific industry, and in many cases it does specific applications. So you've got 7 to 10 resources sitting developing highly valuable intellectual property, and they need hardware and scale to go out and be successful. So in terms of approaching us, I had not mentioned it, but we have 175,000 customers globally. It's pretty easy to find us. But I think for us, it's always been about supporting those smaller organizations or smaller groups within large organizations that don't have the time, material, resources, or skills to get their solution to market.
And Roland, maybe to build on that. Yeah, absolutely, Stacey. Thanks. I probably should have waited for the cue. I think we see some of the most impressive solutions coming out from startups, and I think it goes back to the point we made up earlier, which is, you can't do everything well, and we see a lot of startups with very crisp value props, building really cool technology, serving really important needs. I think a great example that I see right now is in the IoT security space. Right, we as Microsoft are firmly committed to security as a core fundamental aspect of IoT, but there are certain niche solutions that are critical for certain experiences and environments. And so we have great partners like I think it's Device Authority and Secure Things who've recently, in a very easy way, come to market with Microsoft and gotten exposure to our field and our partners. And so I think that we commit aggressively to our Microsoft for Startups program, trying to build that out. And we talk about matchmaking. One thing that we work to do through the marketplace is to ensure that our startups who come into our platform and participate in the broader ecosystem have a nice platform from which to speak about their solutions and get connected with customers. So I'm glad you bring that up because I'm excited by the funnel of activity I'm seeing from the startup world right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on this one too.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry, I think it's a great question because there's so many startups, and back to this idea that everyone should focus on the thing that they do really well. In a perfect world, they'd be able to do that. So as a startup, your biggest goal is revenue. Most likely, you need money to be here tomorrow. So you ask kind of what can they do to get started? I think these programs like Microsoft and Arrow are great. I think part of the challenge from the startup is that their wedge on their own is probably not an entire solution. The Device Authority guys have a great, stack that can be added to your IoT platform and make it secure, but on its own, it's not a turnkey solution. So how do we, that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half is, I'm an advisor to a whole bunch of these startups, basically saying, how do we take your thing and as quickly as possible, add it to something that exists where there's already a channel so that it makes that existing solution better or adds a new revenue stream to that existing channel where everybody's getting a win. So you get to stay in business and then you can go figure out what comes next.
Okay. Okay, that's good. That's helpful for any startups out there who are like, I want to work with Microsoft. I've got a great wedge. Okay, let's talk about preparing your business for adoption of an ecosystem or participating in an ecosystem. And we've talked a lot about this, but people, that's the key. And how do you, I think we can say that, but we also should think about how do we incentivize people to sell an ecosystem? How do we think about incorporating training for an ecosystem and communication between people? So I'm going to let Barry kick it off because he is very people focused, and then we'll open it up.
Well, it's good conversation. I would say that we're, as I've heard other people say, these are the early days of the digital transformation. What I do see as providing, supporting the objective of moving in this direction these days, though, is when multiple vendors get together and collaborate on educating the enterprise customer. And we provide a role in that. So we build programs. I've built an IoT smart cities environment, for example, a lab infrastructure that has 6 different startups and a major vendor in the mix of that. What's wonderful about that kind of a full stack learning experience is it's a way to get the full solution in front of customers so that they can kick the tires and get their hands exposed. The technical leaders can see, the technical folks can understand how it works and be able to communicate that back to the other stakeholders. The business decision makers can see that an orchestration exists. So I encourage that the ecosystem makers that we have here on the call and that are listening in, look for ways of bringing that full stack to the customers in educational ways along their journey of co-creating the solution or executing on it and educating everybody on it. So that's one area where I see getting the people exposed, not just into the isolated components, but to the full experience through educational means as being a good way of greasing the opportunity, making it happen quicker.
Ceci, yeah. So I mean, great point. So it's funny. So it makes me think of, so we're working with, a bunch of folks, Accenture, from a OT standpoint, has these cybersecurity centers that they put in key areas. They've got one, developing in Houston, and they've laid out like all the key technologies. They literally, like, you look across the room, they've got full DCS and SCADA systems. They've got, some of the back end, like, some of these rooms, they'll like run like a inductive automation ignition. We're starting to kind of get into these areas. They got some of the cloud technologies. And what they do is it's like couples counseling. They literally bring in, the IT and the OT folks from, major corporations, whether it's oil and gas or otherwise. And they do design thinking workshops. It's like, what are your things? So they're sort of the mediator. But you can see it in the context of the technology there as well. So it's a really interesting practice that they've developed around that so that you can kind of have the open conversation. You can see it in context. You can get hands-on, but then also literally do effectively couples counseling.
Yeah.
So we're seeing more and more of that. I think exactly to Barry's point, you've got to kind of do it all like in together. You can't just look at the tech or the skills. It's got to be everything.
All right. Any other thoughts on preparing your business or preparing your people? Things like,
Yeah, I think Barry makes a good point on the education front. I can't remember the company, but was in Korea a few years ago at one of these executive, talking dinner type things. And one of the executives we were talking through a translator, so it was a little hitchy, but this guy was saying, this is a large company, thousands of employees, and they put every single employee through kind of an intro to IoT, machine learning, AR type, just a cursory overview, and then put a suggestion box in. So these are, the folks that are pushing brooms all the way up to the, the people who are supposed to be data scientists. And he was saying, I don't remember the numbers, but it was this incredible amount of value that had been created because if you go back to my mapping discussion, you've got businesses that don't understand the tech and tech that don't understand the businesses. Now you've got people who are doing jobs, understanding that, oh, this might be an opportunity for machine learning to make my job more interesting. Or if I knew what that sensor reading was on the other end of the factory, I wouldn't have to walk over there. So I think that, educating everyone in your business to what are the tools that are out there is a good start to, it'll help with adoption.
Yeah, Andy, I totally agree. Well. You got to, in order for a company to really thrive and survive in this disruptive time, to really reap the rewards of the technology that's being deployed, you've got to be able to make sure that everybody speaks the same language, understands the potential, the world of the possible, because their jobs are on the line, their roles are being disrupted. So you have to look at educating the entire culture, uplifting everybody, and then what you start to see is the magic of somebody on the front line understanding, hey, if I had the ability to automate that function, boy, my job would be easier, and we produce twice as much output. That's the kind of magic that training brings to the picture, educating the whole organization, uplifting everybody to come up more of to the digital acumen that's required.
All right. I see Lisa has joined us, but Jeff just took an intake of breath. So
I did multiple with head nod. All the cues were there.
No.
And Barry, I just want to underscore your point. I think it's a really important one. And I look at the way Microsoft is approaching these concepts as an entire company, a couple 100,000 people wide, right? Our two biggest investment areas this year are, number one, our commercial marketplace to ensure that we're connecting partners, customers, and sellers and making that ecosystem thrive. And the second one is learning and skilling. Because it's one thing to have all the solutions, it's another thing to have all the skilling, but if you don't bring that together, you're really missing. And so there's a common and fundamental set of training that every single employee in this company has to take, regardless of your role, to ensure you understand the power and the value of the cloud, the possibilities, and the ecosystem. So I can't underscore it enough that without that knowledge and that skilling, you've got a lot of great tools on the shelf, wedges in the pie, you continue it how you want, that aren't being leveraged effectively. So it's critical to have that skilling at every level of the organization to ensure you know what to do with what you have.
Excellent. So Lisa, we will wrap up in a second and give it to you. But all of that, y'all are saying some things that tie very closely to some best practices I've seen companies employ. And I was talking to a utility company who they actually got every single business unit. They got their people in a conference room and were like, we're going to do a digital transformation. They did all the skilling, all the classes. So yeah. They're going to do a digital transformation. They say, what do you want to do now that you know? Now that you know what we're trying to do and some of the tech, what are your business cases that y'all can think of? And everybody wrote down their thoughts. They got like 100 and some odd thoughts. And then they came back and they were like, they looked at the ROI as some of the top ones and they were like, y'all, we can do all 140 of these, or we can prioritize these couple. And what would you like us to do? And thankfully, everyone said prioritize these couple. So they got everybody on board. They did a continuous, like, here's how we're doing this. Here's what we're going to do. Here's where our focus is going to be. And here's why. And it really helped educate the entire company about the process, which I think, like you're saying, Barry, like all of y'all are saying, really helps. So I think, Lisa, take us home.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone on the panel. This was a fantastic session. I want to remind everyone who joined that in the next couple of days, we'll have all the content and recordings up on our website. So if there's anything that you missed, if there's a session you weren't able to attend, please go there and you'll see everything. And thank you again, everyone. It was a fantastic session.